And welcome back, everyone, to another edition of Going for Two, presented by Home Field Apparel. I am your host, the publisher of the Extra Points newsletter, Matt Brown. I'm joined here, as almost always, by my colleague and co-host Bryan Fischer. Weird week today, but hopefully a good one. I know that there's travel stuff happening in your house. I am in a couple of hours after you're listening to this here at home. I'm going to Atlanta. Our colleagues are kind of all on the road right now too, but these are exciting things, even though it's kind of a weird week, right?
Yeah, lots of travel coming up for both of us, and yeah, it is kind of a bit of a weird week. It seems like that you have that Memorial Day, and everybody does kind of take things a little bit slow, but it seems like a little bit slower than usual. Usually, we're so used to kind of having news dumps to deal with on Friday before Memorial Day or on Memorial Day itself. It's like you kind of think you're almost scrambling, but this year was a quiet one, which I certainly appreciate.
It was wonderful. Listen, if some news had broken, I wouldn't have picked it up. This was the best I had gotten at actually not touching my phone for a couple of days. I gardened. It was great. I do want to talk because I know you're not tuning in here to listen to me talk about gardening. If you want to talk about gardening, we'll bring in Mike Felder, who I think we actually will do in a couple of weeks. I was just talking with him a couple of days ago, actually. I do want to talk about the closest thing we have to hard football-ish adjacent news. And then I also want to talk about a story that Andy and I worked on for the past couple of weeks that published earlier this week about RPIs. We're wrapping up the major conference spring meeting circuit right now, right? Everyone else did their shindig in Arizona or in North Carolina, and now the SEC is meeting in Destin. You and I are not there. A lot of our compatriots are there right now. Is anything happening here besides a bunch of rich people pretending they're not extremely mad at each other?
Well, quietly and behind doors this time around, if Greg Sankey will have his way, and obviously, SEC spring meetings, I think really that is the most public facing of the conference meetings. A lot of it is behind the scenes at other, but this is an event there in Destin, and has been for the last couple of years. Obviously, coaches are going to the podium and they're speaking with the media, and there's a lot of radio shows that go down there. But yeah, it's some interesting times. Some topical agenda items. Like the last couple of years, it's been like selling alcohol in stadiums, and obviously they're back in person this year for the first time in the last 2 years. So like it is a bit of a different vibe down there from Destin, and I think top of mind for everybody beyond the kind of the big sport issues surrounding the NCAA transformation, et cetera, is probably scheduling. I think that is the big one for the SEC, is to kind of determine how the SEC is going to look in the next couple of years. Obviously, the things are set now, but it's like not only when Oklahoma and Texas join the league, but there's some big decisions being made in terms of what the schedule itself looks like for the SEC football footprint as they move to ESPN, as they add Texas and Oklahoma into the fold, and really this kind of unwieldy league has to play some football and figure out how to better kind of equip their members to travel around the conference there.
Let me ask you a stupid question before we look and talk through a couple of these potential proposals, because I've been watching some of the proceedings and following along on social media. And of course, everybody is going to put a microphone in front of a coach and ask what kind of football schedule they should play. 8 games, 9 games, protected rivalries. My dumb question is, why are we asking these people that? Because isn't that a conversation that happens above their pay grade? Maybe I'm sure their AD asks for their opinion, but ultimately that's not something that, Billy Napier should decide, right?
Yeah, I don't think in terms of the actual decision-making process that the coaches are necessarily too involved in terms of actually voting and whatnot. But look, these are some of the biggest coaches, some of the biggest names in the sport of college football. So obviously their opinion is going to get noticed and get discussed, and they are the ones getting trotted up in front of the podium there in Destin to actually ask get their opinions from media members. So at least in terms of the kind of general perception, I think it's probably a little bit overarching, but yeah. This is an AD/president's type of decision, and honestly, it's really one being made by ESPN, given their right control. That is who really is driving the bus, and so I think as much as you might want to get Nick Saban's opinion, who has been very insistent on playing 9 conference games for a long time now, his position has not changed about this.
No, I mean Saban's probably on the more radical end of the spectrum, because if it was up to him, allegedly, according to what he says, he doesn't want to play Louisiana Monroe anymore. He doesn't want to play New Mexico State. He would rather only, all bangers only, which is his athletic director were like, no, we have other obligations that we have to take care of. There's a reason the world works this way. I'm not blaming anybody. I think it sucks for me to sit here in my basement and be like, these reporters aren't doing a good job. Like I would ask the same question probably, but ultimately their opinion doesn't really matter that much. I mean, unless it's Nick Saban, because we have to transcribe whatever he says about anything.
Well, that is certainly true this time around, given his recent spat with Jimbo. But everybody's been well coached on some of those questions. But in terms of scheduling, I mean, this is obviously a big deal for these athletic departments. You got to understand that even in the SEC, they are dealing with fan attendance, issues and questions about how big do the stadiums need to be. Obviously Alabama has been very public in terms of making sure that that fan experience is top of the line, and fans are staying for those games. I mean, you go back to those Sunbelt foes or those FCS foes in the middle of November, like there's some empty swaths of section there at Bryant-Denny, and how you can combat that is having Mississippi State come in, in extra time, or play a Florida. Those exciting conference games, are certainly going to drive not only eyeballs from a TV perspective, but put fans in seats. And I think that is going to be a overarching decision that the ADs are going to look at and say, in terms of our bottom line, not only does it help in terms of those media dollars, but getting actual people to pay for tickets, getting an extra SEC game on the docket is going to be a lot more beneficial for us than really paying millions of dollars now in terms of some of these guarantee games where you can not only kind of that cutoff of your financial outlay, but bring in some additional revenue. I think that is going to be something a lot of the ADs have really made a point of saying, look, this is going to be a benefit for our athletic department overall, getting an extra conference game.
Yeah, I mean, and to be fair, if you start playing 9 conference games, which is what most of the rest of the country does anyway, that doesn't mean that you're never going to play SoCon Saturday ever again. You're just one fewer game in that particular inventory. You're absolutely right. It's a major financial decision, not just for one. ESPN will be happy about it because they get extra inventory. Although I have been hearing that they are unlikely to give the SEC gigantic new bags of money if they move to a 9-game, like at least immediately for a 9-game schedule. But it isn't. It's tickets, and it's also popcorn and parking spaces and upselling people once they get into the building and getting them to stay there. And that's hard to do. Honestly, if we're being honest here, it's hard to do regardless of the opponent when it's Alabama in early September or Northern Florida, just because it's so freaking hot that nobody wants to be there at noon, even if it's like a good game. They'd rather come at 3:30 or 6:30 or later. But playing somebody they actually have heard of, like this has been one of the weird challenges about the SEC. You've probably heard this a couple of times before. Like, I don't think Georgia's been to A&M yet. Some of the, with the current system of a bloated conference with divisions and only one road, like non-protected divisional rivalry, you'll go years without playing everybody then. And that makes you feel like it's less of a conference. I understand that it's been communicated to our friends in the national media that the SEC is really only meaningfully considering 2 scheduling options at the moment, either staying at 8 or going to 9 and moving to a three protected rivalries, which to me is almost indistinguishable from pods. But I understand what that word seems to trigger a lot of coaches and trigger people, because it seems like a very Reddit thing, which it kind of is, but it's also not. Like, but anyway, or moving to one of those 2 things. And if I had to make a bet, I think they're probably going to go to 9 games, even though I realize that's going to lead to a lot of complaining, and not everybody benefits from that. But you got a 16-team league, if just to get everybody around. And the Mississippi States and the Vanderbilts and the South Carolinas, they want Texas too. Their coaches might not, but Texas fans, I'm told, spend lots of money. They would like them to come to their campus every once in a while, and under this current system, by the time that Texas actually shows up, not only will your coach have been fired, your AD will have been fired too, because it'll been like 9 years. Nobody stays anyplace that long.
Yeah, I think the interesting kind kind of divide in the SEC is obviously over between the haves, the Alabamas and the Georgias of the world. They do want, the extra conference game. Obviously, it means a lot to them in terms of increasing their reputation and strength of schedule, and one that, let's face it, they go into most games, kind of having that advantage of being able to win it. And so, they're not as concerned about playing, a Vandy or an Ole Miss or, a Florida an extra time a year, because they know that they have a better than average shot. And with potential playoff expansion, on the horizon, it doesn't really penalize them as much, especially if you're talking about taking the two teams that have the best conference record going to the SEC championship games, where the divisional structure, which we've seen create some unique conversations and combinations when it comes to the college football playoff mix, with non-division winners getting in, like it's less of a big deal when it's just based on straight percentage. And so that is kind of one aspect. And then really the other aspect is not just in terms of that split in terms of moving to 8 or 9 conference games, but like who's going to be your protected opponent. I think there's some heavy debate amongst some SEC schools over who that should be designated as. Like if you're talking about South Carolina, it probably doesn't matter as much if they're playing Columbia, which is playing Missouri and Columbia and whatnot, and having that rivalry.
They'll always play Missouri and Columbia, folks.
Yes, but it's like there's like that. There's like I don't think they're necessarily too focused on necessarily playing some of their Kentucky or whatever. But like for Vanderbilt, you would think they would want to have Tennessee as one of their designated rivals if it's the 1-7 split. Tennessee, they might benefit from moving to that, but obviously there's that third Saturday in October that they have to worry about. They have put a lot into, and obviously that's a terrific rivalry in itself that existed long before we were talking about 16 teams league. So it's going to be fascinating to see that kind of discourse play out, not just over the next week or so, but kind of the summer. You thought fans are sniping on Feinbaum over non-conference schedules. I can't wait until this debate really starts to pick up going forward, because there are a lot of fans that are going to get a little bit upset. Like if you ask a Florida fan about LSU, I'm sure they would say we'd much rather play Auburn, a little bit closer to home. It's the rivalry between LSU, although it has been a little bit testy the last couple of years. Maybe not the most true geographical rivalry they would probably want to have on their docket. So those type of conversations, I think, are going to be a little bit unique to the SEC, that probably not germane to, say, the Pac-12 when it comes to discussing who their protected rivals are going to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bigger deal because everything is a bigger deal when we're talking about SEC football. But I understand that I guess we have to talk about this. I don't understand how you could possibly have just one protected rival in a league of 16 teams, which is what this is going to be. And 2, in a league where the history and level of emotional investment is so high that almost everybody has multiple games that they absolutely want to make sure happens every year. For Florida, right? Yeah, the Florida Georgia game has to happen every year, but Florida Tennessee is still a big deal. It's especially a big deal to people who are a little bit older than us and remember when Tennessee was good. But that is a game that absolutely matters to both those fan bases. LSU,
and it matters to the TV partners too. To keep going back to that point, having Florida Georgia on your calendar every single year, that matters to ESPN as well, and especially so given the investment that they've made in the league going forward, and the fact that they do have to kind of come out of the gate with that new package, to where they are putting a big emphasis on that game of the week that was formerly belonging to CBS.
Yep,
they want those type of games.
Brian, do you remember off the top of your head what has been routinely, and not last year, but routinely the highest rated, the biggest game of the SEC regular season?
Well, it'd probably be the Auburn Alabama in the Iron Bowl.
It isn't. I mean, it's sometimes the Auburn Alabama game, but it's also the Alabama LSU game, because LSU has been better, and that has had more championship the potential, right, for that particular game. I mean, if Alabama and Georgia played in the regular season more often, I'm sure that would be there too. But now, excuse me, you're ESPN. Do you want to risk you can't risk not having an Iron Bowl. That would lead to a congressional investigation. But if you're the TV partner, do you want to risk not having an Alabama LSU game? I mean, maybe Brian Kelly sucks at LSU and they go back to the 80s, but probably not. That's still going to be a big deal. Even if you replace that with Alabama, Oklahoma, it's not the same thing. And among the 8 kind of halves, like there has to be like, yeah, like I mean, like what would be the point of having Texas and Texas A&M in the same conference and then having them not play because Texas and Oklahoma were the protected games? That sucks. That's bad for fans. It's bad for television. I will not be gaslit into people pretending that is a thing that could happen. Although, I mean, I guess it could be because people are dumb, but it's hard for me to like wrap my arms around that being a legitimate possibility. Either you keep things the same, or you have to move to a system where at least 2 and probably 3 of those games are protected, so you can have some inventory stability, which I think would be good for everyone.
Well, and change is always hard in college athletics. You know, it's so random. Like people get so dug in on the way things have been, and more so than in the SEC, because these rivalries have been longstanding for decades. And there's a lot of intrinsic history that you know. I mean, some of the biggest moments in all of college football have happened in some of these rivalry games. And I understand, you know, the need to you know, spice things up, but I think at the end of the day, the 3-6 model is probably going to end up, you know, winning out just because it makes more sense. You know, I mean, you want to debate if you're Arkansas and debating whether you want to play Texas or you want to keep that LSU game, you know, you're still going to end up playing them. Like the benefits of that 3-6 model is the rotation does happen a lot more often. And you're right, just being in a 16 team league. I mean, you go back to when the WAC was 16 teams. There's a reason why they had quote unquote pods, you know, back in the day is because they weren't able to necessarily play everybody across the league. And while it led to some issues, certainly.
Yeah, that conference also went from northern Louisiana to Hawaii in a time when nobody had actual grown-up television money yet. And it did help facilitate the breakup of that conference. But not exactly apples to apples comparisons here.
No, but like like there's just having 16 teams. I mean, it's a bit unwieldy, and you know, if you're and the thing is in these football programs, it's not necessarily going from Louisiana to Hawaii, but you know, like the travel issues. If you have a you know, a permanent crossover opponent that's you know, a bit far flung in terms of the SEC footprint, not that big of a deal in terms of college football, given the charters and just the way teams travel nowadays. It is definitely less of an issue for a lot of these teams. And I think the other thing that you can kind of keep in mind is, because all the rights are being held by ESPN now going forward, you know, when they eventually take over that deal in a couple of years, is they're going to be able to set more of these kickoff times in advance. So not only are you going to be able to have some of these rivalry games, you're going to be able to plan a little bit more. That means your ticket sales folks are going to be able to you know, create some you know, revenue opportunities surrounding these games, because you know it's going to be on at 3:30 on Saturday or noon, weeks in advance, not just necessarily kind of the 6 or 7 day holds that you normally get nowadays. So you know, there's a lot of factors in this, but I think at the end of the day, common sense is going to win out, and you're going to see probably the 3-6 model as the SEC kind of moves into alignment with everybody else in terms of playing 9 conference games.
This is weirdly a source of personal consternation, or a thing that I have heard other football coaching staffs get angry, like weirdly personal about the idea that the Big Ten schedule or the Pac-12 schedule is somehow harder because they play more conference games, and it is not a fair representation, or a, you know, for the playoff or postseason opportunities. And speaking of common sense winning out, in a perfect world, we are dealing with an expanded playoff very shortly after the SEC expansion completes. And some of those data points become moot, because if you are a very, very good football team, you'll find a way to get the 9 seed either way, which would be beneficial. I mean, like this system will definitely suck for that first year when there's only 4 SEC spots. It means either the SEC is going to get all 4, or maybe none, kind of depending on how things break. Probably not none, but I don't think that matters. Like, I think you have to be kind of a crazy person to look at the Big Ten schedule and think that's harder because somebody had to play Minnesota an extra time compared to the SEC West. But this will hopefully take away that talking point, and so it's not something that we hear on sports radio for a month in November.
Well, I mean, because you're playing that extra conference game, you are kind of guaranteeing half the league an extra loss, and so I think that's where consternation comes in between coaches, because as much as we can talk about strength of schedule and oh, this team played on the road against this team and yada yada yada, the bottom line is when you're voting in the top 25, when you're on the selection committee, what's the first thing everybody's going to look at? It's that overall record, and that drives a lot of the conversation surrounding college football. So I think those coaches are maybe half right in terms of when you guarantee a lot of teams in your league, that extra loss, and they're all kind of bunched together in those standings. I think there are some talking points nationally and even regionally that certainly crop up from time to time about relative strength of the conference schedule. And when you're kind of guaranteeing most of your teams an extra win, I think that perception wise at least plays a bit of a part.
There is you know what? I don't have a good segue for this. I was going to say something about common sense prevailing, but we know what that doesn't always happen in college athletics. We know that you bring a bunch of people in the room that they may complain. Effective change often happens by gunpoint, the proverbial gunpoint, not like actual gunpoint, right? But it can take a while. One thing that's way easier than trying to get a bunch of football administrators to decide on the scheduling model is buying affordable, comfortable apparel from Home Field Apparel. Our friends have finally acquiesced to the internet. They have considered Arizona State. The new collection is wonderful, just as we had expected. I might actually buy some of this stuff. It's a cool color. I think the vintage kind of swirly sun that it was something I hadn't seen before. That looked pretty great. And then if you are somebody, an Arizona partisan and you're upset now that Arizona State has all of their stuff on there, good news. Arizona is dropping next week. Don't tell anybody at Arizona State. I'm a little bit more excited for the Arizona one, just because it's got the cactus. Why wouldn't you want to wear a cactus on your shirt?
Oh, the bearded sun, part of that Sun Devil collection. I mean that was top notch find by the Connor in the home.
It's really good. I also love the baseball script hoodie, the one that just says Devils.
Oh yeah,
right. Like I don't need any more hoodies, and it's weird because if I lived in Arizona, I wouldn't need any hoodies, or almost no hoodies. But maybe come October, I end up grabbing one of those. It's not just Arizona. It's not just Arizona State. We have what was the first big news Saturday drop from it was Arkansas. Right? My brain's not putting. We got Arkansas stuff on there. We have almost every other big name program within the Power Five, many in the G5, many in 1 AAA, and several within the Division II and Division III space. I'm wearing a Home Field Apparel shirt today too because it is laundry day. So I'm wearing the old school vintage Extra Points logo with the Foila Saxa, RIP, the Extra Points and the Intercollegiate. I'm not supposed to use this logo anymore, but it's still a great shirt. You can buy other Extra Point shirts on Home Field Apparel as well. When you do that, use promo code Extra Points to save 15% off of that first order. If you're some kind of weirdo and you haven't bought anything from these guys, even though you've been shilling it all the time for like 6 months, if that's you, I'm not judging you. I'm a little judging you. I'm not judging you. Use the promo code. You can save a little bit of scratch on there. And then if you would like to get your school or your conference involved, drop me a note at matt@extrapointsmb.com. I don't think can't say who yet, but there's a word. I'm hearing rumors out there on the internet that maybe a conference is going to be working with Home Field Apparel or finding a way to work with Home Field Apparel to dig out a couple of other old school interesting logos and everything. If that's the kind of thing that you're interested in. Also want to just very quickly note that the Going for Two podcast reaches over 10,000 downloads a month. It is part of the Extra Points newsletter, which reaches 10,000 people a day, at least on the free list. An audience full of college sports industry insiders, diehard fans, college students, professors, everybody that's very involved in this ecosystem. And we would love to help you reach that audience. You can hit me up at sales@extrapointsmb.com to discuss packages on this podcast and on the Extra Points newsletter. We do have a little bit of available inventory this summer. I would be happy to enthusiastically shill for your product, not just Home Field shirts. I do love Home Field shirts, and I really would chill for those if they weren't giving me money, but they are giving me money. I want to talk to you about something else that has nothing to do with scheduling, and it is very in the weeds. It's a very June-ass college sports story, but that is kind of what we specialize in. I want to talk a little bit about the RPI. And I don't know if you were around the internet very much on Monday when the college baseball bracket was announced, but Brian, I certainly noticed a bunch of people very mad online about the RPI. I assume you saw some of those things too?
Yeah, shocking that people would get upset over something the NCAA did, but in particular the NC State fans, I think they were, well, the pitchforks were out again. Not only was
I feel
the
bad for
relationship
them.
with the NCAA kind of on rocky ground given what happened last year, but to be left out with their RPI being as high as it was, and really the talk about RPI in this baseball season was quite unique. And so I think that in particular kind of added an extra element to Selection Sunday for the road to Omaha there.
Yeah. I listen. I legitimately do feel bad for NC State, and I think I've made this joke on this podcast before, but like I think most fans it are always looking for conspiracies and believe that everybody's out to get them. And you and I have been in this industry enough to know that nobody has the mental capacity to properly execute a conspiracy. Like no one's out to get you. But I will say there's a lot of compelling evidence that maybe somebody out there is out to get NC State. Probably not Indianapolis, might be God. That's between you and your maker, friends of the Wolfpack. But not just them, they got a job. The other big one was with the Rutgers, right? Won 44 games, finished second in the Big Ten, was by all measures a good baseball team. Like almost every Northern baseball team, pretty lousy RPI. And a big reason for that, as I have been told, and I'm sure our boss could tell us, you can't really, you don't have a whole lot of flexibility in scheduling quality midweek opponents when you're in New Jersey, because you can't fly somebody from Texas to come up there. And most of the teams that are around you aren't super great. That's true in the Midwest too. And for most of college baseball season, the weather sucks. So you got to play like the first 3 weeks mostly on the road, which means that if you don't win your conference, or if your conference doesn't do well in February, there really may be nothing you can do. And I don't think Rutgers, got a whole lot of drew a whole lot of high quality Big Ten baseball teams anyway. So it's that led to a lot of conversation that we saw about why are we still doing this? Because this metric does seem like it has a lot of flaws. We saw multiple baseball games canceled late in the season because people were worried about protecting their RPI. This doesn't happen in men's and women's basketball because they don't really use the RPI anymore. They use the net, which is a combination of some RPI metrics and also efficiency stats and also strength of schedule. Men's and women's hockey don't completely use the RPI. They use pairwise systems, which is a little bit of a different calculation. Lacrosse has some sport-specific tweaks to the RPI, but a lot of other sports still do this. And Andy and I, Andy Wittry, a longtime freelancer who's now about to leave us for On3, called a bunch of sport administrators. We called a bunch of quant people. It's still being used in a lot of different sports right now. And I haven't talked to a SWA or a sport administrator or a coach that's like, I love the RPI for volleyball. I love the RPI for softball. It seems more of, we just haven't been able to figure out something that works out better.
Yeah, I think in particular with baseball, I'll get to the other sports in a second, but like in particular with baseball, it is kind of ironic. I mean, a sport so driven by numbers and so overanalyzed using numbers, and this is kind of where they get tripped up. And I think it does kind of speak to the larger point kind of surrounding the NCAA landscape, is that there's a lot of teams out there, and trying to figure out and compare them and contrast them, like it can be difficult. And as much as I give credit to a lot of the members on these committees for actually watching the games and tuning in late at night to watch some random Pac-12 baseball game between two teams who might make the field, it's still a lot. And there's still only a limited number of hours in the day, especially when you're watching baseball, given how long it takes. So, they have probably the biggest challenge in terms of sorting this out. And obviously that's why RPI and some of these numbers are there designed to kind of help them, but it can also be a bit of a crutch. And I think we have had this conversation for forever surrounding the men's basketball committee. Obviously they changed that. They went to some different metrics. And I think everybody understands that has worked out a little bit better. There's a little bit more focus on, especially those quadrant one wins and losses in terms of how you do against the really good teams. Maybe some tweaks and changes are going to be coming to baseball in the near future. I don't anticipate that happening anytime soon, just given everybody's attention is on so many other different things right now. But it does kind of speak again to just kind of the changing nature of these committees in terms of what they value. It might be non-conference schedule one year, it might be just straight RPI the other, and like having that moving target, I think has led to a big sense of frustration amongst administrators, amongst coaches in particular. Like, what are we gaming for? What are we actually going out there for beyond just to win every game, which is always going to be the goal? But like, how are we going to construct this team? How are we going to construct this schedule to really make sure that we get in the best position to make the postseason? And because that does change from year to year, given the composition of all these committees, that can be hugely frustrating for a lot of these coaches. And it's just one of those factors that is out of their control. You hear it all the time about coaches. We're only focused on what we control. Well, when it comes to schedule, when it comes to things like this, sometimes they really can't. And I think that does lead to a lot of the gripes that we've had this past week from the baseball side. Obviously, it happened before that with some of the softball programs that got left out of the tournament there. It happened in lacrosse and all volleyball, all the others. There's always going to be one or two teams that are left out that will have a legitimate reason to complain. And this does kind of speak to kind of the nature of this big, loose governing body of the NCAA and how it kind of determines championships.
I have a lot of empathy for the ADs that are on the baseball selection committee and the people that are on the softball selection committee, because I don't think they get paid for that.
Nope.
And it's a lot of work. And if you do it really, really well, people forget that you did it within 8 hours. And if you screw up a little bit, they're going to scream at you for years. I don't know. I mean, like we've kind of talked about this before, right? Like it seems like it's a lose-lose sort of thing. And these metrics help, but I've joked about this, and this is kind of a half-baked idea and maybe something that's worth fleshing out more for another story. I almost think it might be better to have those selection committees for these sports made up of people that aren't athletic directors or that don't work for any of these schools. Either you pay stipends and pay people in D2 or D3 to do it, or retired people to do it, or you remove anybody that's like actually in this world. One, to remove the perception of conflicts of interest, and two, so other people can actually focus on the gig a little bit better. The other thing, which I also recognize is very much in the weeds, and this was a reoccurring concern that was raised to me and to Andy too when we were calling people, is when you are running, say, a softball or a volleyball program in like Montana, or in another rural part of the country, your goal is like, I want to make sure that I play as many, quasi-local teams as I possibly can. Or if I'm in the Pacific Northwest, or if I'm in Colorado, or so, like if you're in Colorado, you want to play Colorado State, Air Force, Northern Colorado, any place you can possibly bus, if at all possible. But and that might even be a bigger consideration than maximizing yourself for the postseason, because this stuff's expensive. But because of the way the RPI is gamed or tweaked, if you are like an average team in a good mid-major conference, or you're somebody that's like not likely to win your kind of one bid league, you'll have coaches or say like, I recognize that it is financially in my best interest to play you, but I can't do it without hurting my numbers, which now means that the poor school has to either shell out a guarantee or they get caught into a death spiral. So like scheduling for softball and volleyball and women's lacrosse and these other sports, I had told, is way freaking harder than it needs to be, and increasingly more expensive than it has to be, in part because of people trying to wrap their arms around this metric. And I became a political science major because I'm not good at math. So I cannot sit here and tell you I had calculated the exact formula, but there are implications here beyond just screwing up a postseason tournament that are important for the entire industry when we continue to use this metric.
Yeah, and I think, speaking to your point about it being so difficult, I mean, you talk with folks that are not even ADs, like even on some of these committees, it is your assistant ADs, your associate ADs, et cetera, that maybe are in charge of these various programs. But like, you speak to these committee members and they're like, I also have to go out to the soccer game and watch our own soccer game. And if it's, baseball, sometimes it's, especially in the SEC, you're meeting with donors, you're glad handing, you're there for 3.5 hours, 4 hours at the ballpark doing your kind of normal job duties. And then you have this kind of on top of it. And, I think there's been various solutions proposed to like, how do we get around to this? And you're right. I think probably more permanent standing members of a committee. Maybe you're just rotating fewer people in and out that are athletic directors. Because let's face it, a lot of it is just a prestige factor, right? You do your time on the women's soccer committee or the baseball committee, and then you can kind of move your way up and prove yourself worthy of maybe going on the men's basketball committee, which is obviously kind of the gold standard there.
Yeah.
And put that star on your resume, which, let's face it, it's a big deal, especially if you're not a Power 5 AD and you're serving on one of those committees. You go into interview for a bigger job and you say, hey, look, I got a lot of press and understood a lot about the process serving on the men's basketball committee. Like that is a huge thing for a lot of administrators out there. So I think it's a system that is right for a revamp, but I don't think this is going to be an area that say the transformation committee is looking too closely at, given all that's on their plate coming up.
Yeah, you know what? If you have a good idea, my email is matt@extrapointsmb.com. If your idea is good, I'll write about it. We'll talk about it here on the air, right? Whether that is moving towards the hockey model where you basically get rid of the committee and just have it, we hire someone reads a chart and we can calculate it. We know exactly who's going to get in ahead of time. Maybe that's the move. Maybe you have something different. Maybe you're actually good at math. I'd love to hear from you.
I mean, we've been talking about changes to the committee for decades now. I mean, I remember not too long ago about like even the committee on infractions, which is obviously dealing with a lot more serious matters than say who's making the cut line on the tournament. But like adding permanent members to that was a big step in the right direction for the NCAA. Outside members, a lot of outside legal counsel that were part of that, the committee on infractions appeals and whatnot. Like there's been changes being made to the system that make a lot of more common sense that you think could be brought to other sports. And we'll see if that ultimately ends up happening. But like I said before, like there's just so much on everybody's plate, that maybe tweaking and changing these committee structures probably not top of mind for a lot of folks right now.
No. And I get it. I look, I can see how many people opened up the story about RPI. I know what's on the top of y'all's minds and what isn't. Doesn't mean that we're not going to write about it because it's interesting and it's good work, but I get it. Speaking of people that I want to talk to, I want to just very quickly speak this into the universe here before I head out and get ready to pack and get everything ready to go. It's a little bit stressful for me because I've never been in this conference before. And it's weird. I never get... I don't want to say, I'm trying to think of the right word here. Like I'm not intimidated when I'm in like a football press conference or something. I don't feel intimidated when I'm talking to an athletic director or a coach or an athlete. I've been sports writing for a long time now. I'm not really young anymore. And like that world is when I feel comfortable with. I do sometimes feel inadequate or apprehensive when I'm talking to a bunch of academics. And I don't know if that's because my mom was an academic and I do not have that transcript and do not have that body of work. And even though I can literally write for a living, I'm not doing these same kind of things. So, a little bit nervous about this thing, about this big event here. It's a big collection of researchers studying sports management and presenting their papers and talking about, goals for the discipline here over the next year. I've reached out to several professors trying to interview them on this show and to write about some of their work here for Extra Points. Some of that is about athlete, academic, and medical outcomes or mental health. Some of that's about conference realignment. Some of that's about athletic budgets and how people get and spend money. It's one thing for us to pontificate recklessly. It's another thing for me to talk to somebody who actually does the work. And it's yet another thing to talk to somebody who studies the work and might be able to gut check our hunches or what practitioners are saying with data. I know that professors do listen to this show. So if you're going to be there, my email is matt@extrapointsmb.com. I'd love to talk with you. And if you know other people who are and might want to talk with me, pass along my contact information. I'll be in Atlanta for a couple of days. I should get back Saturday evening. The goal is to be able to, I don't want to promise that we're going to have a going for two with some of these guests here, but I'm reaching out to several of them. I hope so. If not, you'll be able to see some of this stuff on Collegiate Sports Connect, which is free in the near future. Speaking of free things, this podcast is free, even though the newsletter is not. You can find the podcast, of course, on Spotify, on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. If you enjoy it, please tell your friends. Please tell your associates, your colleagues, people that you only kind of know. Help spread the word. Leave nice reviews. They look like Alabama and Texas A&M recruiting classes. That's how we can continue to build this. That's how we can we can get more home fields and make this a more sustainable product. Bryan, what else should I plug?
You can always rate and review. And if you're not already subscribed to this here podcast, please do so on whatever platform you like it, your podcast. If you want to jump on YouTube and see our faces made for radio, you're perfectly capable of doing that and subscribing on our D1 Ticker channel. A lot of interesting stuff there. If you haven't subscribed for Collegiate Sports Connect and you want to get into this industry, if you're studying this industry, like a lot of folks that you'll be meeting there at NASM, jump on. I think we've got breakout rooms. We've got a lot of videos about the industry. And I think for fans that maybe are not quite well versed in terms of like how big college athletics is, this whole ecosystem, this is something that a lot of professors are out there like studying some of the details and the finer points, much like any industry out there. But the sports bent, I think probably doesn't get a whole lot of press. And so it'll be interesting to find a lot of those conversations that you'll have this week in Atlanta, and a lot more coming for across the D1 Ticker family here.
That's right. Last quick plug, subscribe to Extra Points. It's the newsletter that supports this podcast, that supports, keeps me from having to go get a real job, publishes Monday through Friday with original reporting, analysis, and other perspectives on the forces that shape college athletics. You can find that, of course, at extrapointsmb.com. I need to go fill up a suitcase. Bryan, I know you've got some kid stuff that you got to do. Everyone, thanks here for spending some time with us. We will see you on the internet again very soon.